Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This is Tim. You may see us on different channels, me on Langley Outdoors Academy and him on Military Arms Channel, but you are on The Second Legacy today. This is a collaborative effort between Tim and I to dive in and provide a deeper analysis to pass the blessing of our Second Amendment along to the next generation, because there's an opening here and we can make a difference. If you'd like to help us grow Second Legacy, please consider hitting that subscribe button, like the video, put a comment down there, and turn the notification bell on. We need as much help as we can, and it would be amazing if you guys jumped on board with us as we grew this together. But today we are going to dive into something. Me and Tim are going to start talking about some things and some unintended consequences that the left may not have seen coming all around this little slide in with the ATF pistol brace rule. Because one of the things that's amazingly interesting about gun control is the more they push, the more they get punished. It's very, very interesting. And now with that lead in, Tim, what are we going to talk about? I'm excited.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So, with the brace rule that the ATF just, decided to enforce as of January 31st, we have basically the ATF saying that these things that were legal for 10 years and we had no problem with them. Multiple times we were questioned. We even issued letters saying that these things were perfectly legal. We've now changed our minds because of political pressure from the Biden administration. And now all of these are contraband. They're illegal SBRs. You need to register yourself, register your gun, or destroy your property to be compliant. And that sparked lawsuits. We knew the lawsuits were coming. But I have to admit, man, when I started flipping through the news and started reading about all the people and entities joining these lawsuits, it is significant. And then if you take a look at some of the wording, specifically when you take a look at what SB Tactical, FRAC, and B&T, GOA, the lawsuit that they're working on, it's really, really interesting to see how far they're taking this lawsuit. And this kind of rolls into what you're talking about, unintended consequences, right? So that's what I really think we should talk about in today's video is the merits of this lawsuit, what the lawsuit alleges, and what the left may not see coming in terms of a double whammy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to be quite honest, these lawsuits are going for the jugular. These are not glancing blows. They are going all the way. What's interesting about this is, and you kind of alluded to it, this is stirring up a bit of a hornet's nest. And we talked about it offline, but this might be a bigger hornet's nest than they expected. They tried stuff like this prior, and there was some resistance, but it wasn't off the charts resistance. You've got half the country, 25 states through their attorney general have joined these efforts. So, I mean, you're talking about literally half of all of the states in the United States are against this. You've got GOA and you've got the attorney general in Texas. That's one avenue. Then you have the 25 AGs partnering with FRAC and all the different other entities you just mentioned. This has potential and inroads to go beyond ATF overreach. This could potentially, again, highlighting potentially, this could undercut the biggest gun control act in our history, the NFA. I mean, this is big.
Yes. And that's what's really interesting. If you take a look at the wording of some of these lawsuits, they've actually brought up something that we've discussed previously, which was the NFA, which is the National Firearms Act of 1934, which sought to ban everything from handguns to rifles with barrel lengths less than 16 inches, shotguns with barrel lengths less than 18 inches. And then they had the catch-all any other weapon, AOW. There was just anything else they just wanted to group in and regulate as best they could. And so it was a horribly unconstitutional law when it passed in 1934. But one of the key components of the original law, the way it was written, was that it also banned handguns. Banned them by meaning you had to pay a $200 tax, which was about half the price of a car, if I recall correctly. It was the same price as a Thompson submachine gun. Yeah. That's where they got the number from, I believe. They wanted a $200 tax, which was a huge tax in 1934. But they wanted to tax handguns and make you register them just like you would a short barrel rifle, a silencer, or anything else that we know today as being an NFA regulated item. Well, they knew they didn't have the votes to pass that law banning handguns because Americans still carried handguns regularly in 1934, just as they do in 2023. There was no way that was going to pass. So they had to strip that out. Well, this created a huge discrepancy in the law because while handguns were no longer in the law, short-barreled rifles were. And the conundrum here is that you can literally put a handgun in a pocket and hide it. But I have never seen a short-barreled rifle so small I could stick in my front pocket and hide it effectively, right?
Right.
And so
Mm-hmm.
with handguns being unregulated and SBRs being regulated, that was a huge flaw in the law, and nobody's really called that out in the courts and tried to challenge it in the courts. But that's precisely what they're doing with this brace ruling. Not
Mm-hmm.
only are they arguing that the ATF does not have the authority to ban braces arbitrarily through, fiat, just making up laws out of whole cloth, but they're also arguing in at least one of these lawsuits that the NFA is unjust and is flawed, and also because of that short-barreled rifles in general shouldn't even be a regulated item. Now, I know people are going to say, and I would agree, it would be nice if we could get machine guns and silencers and everything else off the NFA. But if we can get a court decision that says that SBRs should not be on the NFA, that would be a huge win, because this goes back to the incrementalism, right? Incrementalism is how we got here. We have 100 years of them trying to pass laws, take our rights away from us, and they've done it incrementally. I would love to get one ruling from the courts or one law passed in Congress that forever protected our Second Amendment rights, but that isn't how it's going to happen. We're going to have to use incrementalism as well to fight back against these laws and start chipping away at them. And these lawsuits have the potential of unraveling the NFA, which I can assure you is an unintended consequence for the Biden administration if it happens.
Oh, absolutely. And how sweet would it be if the ultimate legacy of the Biden administration was that they inadvertently dismantled the NFA? I mean, that would be, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there is potential here. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize on this, guys, this is not possible if you don't have the right people in the right places. If you don't have the right politicians elected to represent your rights. If you don't have all the right positions, governorships, all the different opportunities you have that other people in the world do not have, you can't make something like this happen. This is all going directly back to political action. If you are active, if every single gun advocate, or not even gun advocate, if every single gun owner in this country voted along protecting the Second Amendment rights, it would be the worst thing for the left that you could ever imagine. I mean, just the simple numbers would overwhelm any system anywhere. It would be insane. But I digress. But the interesting stuff here, if you actually dive in and you want some interesting reading and you're watching this video, look at the 1934 actual hearings with the then Attorney General Cummings. That is some fascinating reading. Tim, I don't know if you've ever dove in that deeply, but it's some really unconstitutional stuff that they are just throwing out like it's nothing, just like normal statements. It's really, really intriguing, but it goes back to the exact same principle here. We're going to push so far with the executive bureaucracies that we're going to get slapped with our hand in the court system, which then inadvertently unravels the original unconstitutionality. It's just, you don't write stories this good. Like, you can't make it up.
I know. I'm really rooting for this. And I mean, if you take a look at, I was a party to one of the lawsuits about bump stocks. And when the bump stock lawsuits were going through, a good portion of the Second Amendment community was saying things like, we shouldn't fall on our swords for bump stocks. They're stupid devices anyway. Nobody really owns them. And I kept saying over and over again, it's not about the stocks. It's about what ATF is doing and how ATF is doing it, right? It was all about the process, and the process being rule changes, basically redefining laws or making laws up using the rulemaking process. And I warned people then that if we don't do something to stop this, it's going to set a dangerous precedent. And future administrations that are anti-gun are going to leverage this, and they're going to use it against us again. And sure enough, that's exactly how we wound up with this brace ruling. But I don't think the Biden administration I don't think he fully understands much of anything. I don't think he knows where he is half the time. But I don't think they fully understood the gravity of what they were doing, because I can assure you, when they found out 25 states have joined this legal fight, they're probably going, oh my goodness. I'm sure they were banking on the idea that it would go much like the bump stock ruling, that, it'd make a blip in the news, but some other news event would come along and push it out of the front pages fairly quickly, if it made the front pages at all. And it'll just happen, and we'll move on, and we'll get our victory for 2024, and we can go to our base and say, look, we got this great gun law passed that was really just a rule change. Look what we did, and we didn't need Congress 100%. To do it. But now that 25 states are involved, I think this thing has incredible weight in the courts. I think all of the courts are going to take this more seriously, because this is really now a constitutional issue. This is like a convention of states type issue. This is This is huge because if we don't get the decision we want from the courts, and the decision we want is just and constitutional, and that is to undo this ruling, if we don't get that decision, I would want to pressure these states to pass laws that say, we'll call it firearm owner protection laws, that say our state will not commit any law enforcement resources, any financial resources, any type of resource to enforce any type of rule change that the ATF does henceforth. Therefore, you know, unless it's an act of Congress, we're not enforcing it. Now, I'd love for them to say we're just not going to enforce gun laws at all, but that's not practical, right? But I think it is practical for these states to say, no, if this is how you're going to abuse power using bureaucracies, we're going to push back and say, we're not assisting you in enforcing these rules. I would love to see that.
Well, it's just like the SAPA, the Second Amendment preservation areas. Same thing. It's the same concept. So I think what you said, the big point there that's so powerful is this is bigger than just an info drop on a Friday, which, by the way, they did drop this on a Friday at the end of the day. They just said, hey, this happened, and they were hoping that it would be shuffled through and the news cycle would just kind of carry it. They always do that on Fridays. They always drop stuff on Fridays they don't want attention on. Well, the only problem was you had an entire infrastructure built around attention to these details, and this is where it goes. The people caring about this, the actual draw and the attention put on this gets us to this point. Because 25 state attorneys general, that's a lot. I mean, you're talking about half the states in the entire union. You've got tens of millions of people who would represent injury if this went through. You've got a lot of the recipes for a tremendously huge case. And if you go back to the most recent win that we just had in the Bruen decision, the Bruen decision came forward because of the Sullivan Law and said you can't determine whether I can or cannot have a carry permit. And that's what the entire law was. The entire problem was the state was saying you can or cannot have. You've got to provide just cause. That was the sole issue. What came out of that? Well, yeah, you have to have the ability to provide. You shall issue a carry license now. Kavanaugh came out and said, yeah, there's some prohibitions, but it's not whether you can or can't, or excuse me, you will or you won't. It's you will. Okay.
Right.
Goodness gracious. Clarence Thomas came out and said, oh, and by the way, and on top of in addendum, you can't do sensitive places. This whole interest balancing thing you guys have been doing across the rest of the United States forever, that's also gone. And you can only go off of the history, text, and tradition of the United States as of the ratification. That's what's potentially at hand here. You've got something where you're looking at, yes, we might have the ATF be brought in front of the Supreme Court at some point in time because of these lawsuits. Well, the ruling could literally come down and go, yeah, that's not constitutional. This is not constitutional. Oh, and by the way, ATF, your use of Chevron deference is an abuse of Chevron deference, so we can't do that either. This could literally hit all of the checkboxes that you and I have talked about multiple times.
Yep, and I think the point you brought up is very important about Chevron deference because for whatever reason, well, I know the reasons, the courts have been apprehensive to tackle the issue of Chevron deference. And as we mentioned before, they did with the EPA. Don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But the courts are now starting to signal that they're willing to tackle this if the case is right, if the argument is made that is persuasive. And this may be that issue. We thought we were getting close to it with the bump stocks, but the bump stocks didn't have the traction, right? Nobody was willing to really go to bat for those except for the extreme minority of us. Braces changes the game because these things have been on the market for 10 years. You had major companies, Sig Sauer, Daniel Defense, Ruger, just name them, Palmetto State Armory, the biggest manufacturers in the country, were selling firearms with these braces affixed. Many of these braces from companies like SB Tactical had letters from the ATF saying that these are perfectly legal. And they sold these things to millions of Americans for years, only to have the Biden administration to come along and pressure the ATF. And I have it on fairly good information that this has caused a rift within ATF itself because there are a lot of rank and file ATF members or employees and agents that look at this and go, this is dumb. No. We don't agree with this. Now, I know people want to believe that everybody in the ATF is against guns. That's simply not true. I've met a number of ATF agents that are very pro-gun. And so it's caused a rift between leadership, rank and file, and politicians, because I guarantee you what's going to happen when this goes to Congress, and it will, I can almost guarantee you with this amount of traction, There's going to be congressional hearings, and there's nothing these bureaucracies hate more than getting hauled in front of Congress and then being questioned and made to look bad, because that's what's going to happen. Because when they ask the ATF leadership, okay, who's the subject matter expert here? You or a politician? Well, we are. That's what we're tasked with. We're the subject matter experts. We're tasked with making sure the laws are followed to the letter of the law. That's our job. Okay, so how did you come to change your mind on the braces? For 10 years, you held that they were legal. Suddenly there was a shift. Was this under political pressure from, say, the Biden administration? Now they're faced with the choice of lying to Congress or telling the truth. And the truth is damaging, because if the answer is a politician forced this and that's why we made the decision, it's null and void right there. So
exactly.
I will say that will give us everything we need to win in court. Because
exactly.
That's all the court needs to hear. And so they've really stepped in.
You're 100% correct.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to say it. And we're both so giddy. It's like, it's almost like when you're playing chess and you see someone make a dumb mistake and you're like, don't make a face, just let it happen. Once their fingers off that board, though, it's on. And the other part to this, this is why I love what I do. I genuinely love what I do, following this stuff and commentating on these things. When you've got these bureaucrats inside of Congress and they're getting grilled by congressional House members inside all of these different committees, you're looking at sound bites. You're looking at different pieces of what they're capturing, what they're saying out loud. And when it comes down the road, a year, 2 years, 3 years, to nomination of an ATF director, those clips will be brought up because now they're on record. When it comes to budgetary increases or decreases for bureaucracies, they're now on record. That's the important piece. And just to reiterate that point that you said, sunlight is what these people hate. They don't like to have everything analyzed and scrutinized for what they've done. They like to be in the background. That's why they're bureaucrats. If they were not bureaucrats, they'd be politicians. They'd be in the front of the cameras, but they're in the back. You put sunlight on what they're doing, and you can talk about that for years. And that's incredibly important. And it's beautiful, Tim.
It is. And so we're going to follow this very closely to see how this all plays out, because this thing just keeps growing in scope, it seems, day to day. And as Second Amendment advocates, this is really exciting because this has great potential to achieve great things to the court system. We've had a number of good decisions right now. So the courts seem to be, it's a toss-up anytime something goes to court, but it seems as though the courts are leaning towards our side of the argument in many of these cases because we've had some very significant wins. I also want to drive home the point before we close out today that there's a statement that is extremely true. All politics are local. And this is something that Braden was touching upon earlier in the video. We have a tendency to focus on federal elections, but we really need to focus not just on federal elections, but state elections. Who our sheriff is, who our state representatives are, who our governor is, because all these people represent different lines of defense in protecting our rights. And remember, we are a republic that is made up of 50 different states. The states are supposed to have autonomy. The states are supposed to be able to govern themselves. And the federal government has stepped out of its box, grossly stepped out of its box, by imposing its will on the states and using things like interstate commerce to accomplish that. And so it's very, very important that you guys get politically active. It's very important that you don't just focus on federal elections, that you go out and vote in state elections and make sure you know who those candidates are for everything from the local, county commissioner all the way up to the governor. It's absolutely critical because what we can't achieve at the federal level, we can then achieve at the state level, because the states, again, are the last line of defense in the defense of our rights. Guys and gals, thank you for watching today's episode. We really look forward to you guys in the next episode. We do ask that you would like, share, and subscribe to the videos. Let other folks out there know that the Second Legacy is now live and broadcasting. And we do look forward to talking to you guys again soon, because we have plenty of stuff to talk about. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.